And I'm going to go on and go into the title of that prophetic word. And the title is, I'm coming up. Somebody look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, I'm coming up. Now look at your other neighbor and say, neighbor, this house is coming up. Come on, that's somebody. We're going to be going to the book of Nehemiah 2:17 through 20. And also Nehemiah 2:4 through 6. Nehemiah 2:4 through 6 reads, the king said to me, for what do you ask? So I prayed to the God of heaven. And I said to him, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, I ask that you will send me to Judah, to the city of my fathers, sepulchres, that I may rebuild it. Also Nehemiah 2:17 through 20. And it reads, then I said to them, you see the bad situation we are in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates are burnt with fire. Come, let us build up the wall of Jerusalem, that we may no longer be a disgrace. Then I told them of the hand of my God which was upon me for good, and also the words that the king had spoken to me. And they said, let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for the good work. But when Sanballat the Horonite, and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, and Geshem the Arab heard of it, they laughed us to scorn and despised us and said, what is this the thing you are doing? Will you rebel against the king? I answered them, the king of God, the king of heaven, God will prosper us. Therefore we as servants will rise and build. But you have no portion or right or memorial in Jerusalem. God, add a blessing to the reading, the hearing, and the doing of his word. Amen. Nehemiah was a cupbearer or a servant to the king. He was a man that served faithfully the king. He did his job without mourning, moaning, and complaining. He didn't cry about it. He didn't weep about it. He just did what he was supposed to do. He was a true servant of the king. As many of us, we try to be true servants to the king, our Father in heaven. But Nehemiah was a true servant to the king, and he asked the king for a request to go build up the walls of Jerusalem. And I'm going to go on to my first point. One, God is about to grant favor to the true servants. Amen. That came from Nehemiah 2:4 through 6. Here we see Nehemiah had to be a good servant because Nehemiah 2:5 says, if your servant has found favor in your sight, then grant me this request I ask. If I have found favor, if I have been diligently serving, if I have been a hard worker for you, king, can you please grant me favor to do the will that God has called me to do? And God said, this church right now is in a season of favor. It's in a season where God is about to grant favor on the church because it has true servants inside it. And God said not only is he about to grant favor, but he is about to take the church to another level. Somebody say amen. Amen. But he is about to do a special work inside of this church. Also, people want God to bless them but never serve him. They always want God to give them something but are never working to receive what they want God to do. They always want a blessing without the toil or the labor of doing what God asks. Everybody wants a blessing, but not everybody wants to work for the blessing. I was out working in my grandparents' yard just yesterday, and God told me to go cut this young lady's yard. It was a white lady. And he said, go cut it and go rake it. I said, why? He said, don't ask why. Just do it. Because you are a servant unto men. Lo and behold, after I got through cutting her yard, I ended up speaking a word of life to her. And she ended up crying and telling me everything I said was true. And she ended up coming back closer to God than she was before. the point of that story is that we have to be true servants. Even when we don't receive anything in return, because it's about serving the Father. See, you don't serve nobody because you get something in return. You serve because it's the true call of God on your life. And see, if Nehemiah had been a bad servant, he never would have found favor with the king. If he had not been on his grind, then he would have been able to get what God had for him. If he never was a hard worker, the king would have never found favor with Nehemiah to let him go and rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Amen. So God is about to grant true favor to the servants of God. Amen. Point 2, don't let everybody in your space and let haters hate. Oh, let me say that. Don't let everybody in your space and let haters hate. That's Nehemiah 2:19. And that reads this right here. It says, but when the Sanballat the Horonite, and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, and Geshem the Arab heard of it, they laughed us to scorn and despised us and said, what is this thing you are doing? Will you rebel against the king? Nehemiah had haters. Nehemiah had people who wanted to kill his dream. Nehemiah had people who wanted to talk about him, didn't want him to do what God had told him to do. And see, what you have to understand is that people only hate when one of two things happen. One, they want what you have. Or two, they wish they could be like you. And